this is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk about Donald Trump. I'm not an overly political person. I don't genuinely concern myself with the transitory nature of Republican politics. And by Republican, I don't mean the Republican Party. I mean of the Republic of the United States of America. Point of fact, I am a monarchist. Monarchy. And I don't mean what most people would think by that. Today's world demonizes monarchism as a dictatorship. I don't think that the monarch has to have absolute power, but that doesn't mean I'm on the other extreme and think that the monarch should be purely symbolic with no power. I think they should be an actual executive with checks on their power, and even abilities to remove the monarch if they abuse their power, although not to abolish the monarchy. That, however, is a topic for another day. Right now, we are going to be discussing President GIll and Donald Trumppa. And because I didn't have time to make two videos, one for the Shoot a Bit and one for the Tube of You, I must appease Al Gore, so therefore I shall be using a lot of euphemisms, because the speech of the type that tries to preserve, if you know what I mean, or that tends to stand on the starboard side of the political spectrum, then one is heavily monitored by the two of you. And even though I am not truly a perfect fit with the starboard side of the modern American political debate, even though my views are outside the mainstream altogether in many ways, the truth is Al Gore tends to view me as a starboard side, and they tend to treat me accordingly. And it's not really a theory in which we discuss people who make plans in dark rooms. We actually know that Gaggle and the people who run Gaggle have actually decided to clamp down on starboard speech. We know that they do this because they have been exposed, and they've also said this rather obviously in public. And this is why I don't speak quite as confidently or as properly as before, because, believe it or not, a human doesn't actually listen to these videos most of the time. Mostly, what is being used to monitor you is an artificial intelligence. So, the way it's programmed and its adaptive features tend to depict everyone on the starboard side as either proto-chaplainites or as chaplainites altogether. And if you don't know what a chaplainite is, it's from Charlie Chaplin from the movie The Dictator. And I use it as a euphemism for a certain other person whose name I can't speak without risk. Nevertheless, the Trumpet is standing trial in a hush-money scheme, which theoretically should not be a major charge, but they've decided that the actual charge is filing fraudulent business claims and is possibly a felony. Many on the starboard side, especially those who are Trumpet supporters, well, they see this as political persecution, whilst those on the port side tend to desire Trumpet to be imprisoned. Whilst, of course, Trumpet himself and his most loyal and devout followers think John GIll is attempting to silence him. And if you don't know who John GIll is, there is a Star Trek episode from Star Trek the original series called Patterns of Force. It has a lot of chaplainites in it, and it's a rather good episode, and you'll see what I mean. Our current president of the United States is John GIll. I don't really think that John GIll is running the country. I think that, unlike the episode of Star Trek, his own age has caught up with him, and that he is suffering normal maladies that are associated with aging, and he is simply being manipulated and is a puppet for Malcor, who, of course, is the real power behind the throne. Be it that Malcor is actually a single person, as in the Star Trek episode, or Malcor is a group of people, I don't really know, but I do suspect that others are pulling the strings behind the curtain, and I don't think that Chameleon Harrison is herself the one doing all the string pulling. Nevertheless, the point of this video is less about the Trumpet and whether he is innocent or guilty, but about how political intrigue exists in the minds of the Americans, and how this divisive issue is one that has me worried, because we already live in a world where people on the port side are becoming progressively more violent and progressively more anti-Elvish, all whilst insisting that anti-Elvinism is a starboard trait, and only people on the starboard side are anti-Elvish, pointing to Charlie Chaplin and his chaplainites, who were all anti-Elvish and are, of course, far starboard people. This is, of course, nonsense, because even if Charlie Chaplin and his chaplainites were far starboard, as everyone keeps saying, that would not make anti-Elvinism a starboard position. And it is obvious, if you read history, many people who were very obviously considered portside held anti-Elvish views and even racialist views. And it is not because they were mostly on the port side, but held this starboard side racialism and the starboard side anti-Elvinism. It's because racialism in general and anti-Elvinism specifically are not left to those categories. They are not really port or starboard issues at all, because those issues, those terms don't really mean what people think they do. They generally associate them, much like the bigoted sociopath atheist who make fun of me for my random capitalism and being delusional for having an imaginary friend, tend to equate atheism with rationality and science and humanist values, whilst insisting it is a mere lack of belief in a god. It's something that you simply become acquired and accustomed to as we notice. But really, this video is more about the rank and file. My main problem with the situation is that regardless of what is and is not true, and I don't really believe Trumpet is entirely innocent of all things, neither do I believe that his guilt is so excessive and so extreme that he should be in prison for life. I think that Trumpet is indeed being targeted and singled out based upon political bias. I also believe that the people in the White House are indeed attempting to make this happen. However, I also think this is one of those calumnious events that some people's innate biases would be acting this way even without such. So it's a bit more complicated, while I do think it's exasperated by a government that is actively attacking him. I also think that even without that, you would have biased judges and such going after him as well. But really, that doesn't make him entirely innocent of all things, either. Still, I think that the punishments that have been doled out by the courts against him are excessive. They are beyond what you would expect of someone like him, even if you take into account his own behavior, possibly amplifying the penalties based upon that sort of thing. And my concern mostly is that should he face prison, it could very easily turn nasty, because those who definitely see it as purely a political gambit to remove him as opposition will see this as a furtherance of a police state, and they will certainly act on that. And it'd be ironic because the people on the port side will say, yeah, they're violent on the starboard side, we peaceful port siders. And it's obvious the people on the port side are not peaceful. All you have to do is look at the university protesters fighting for the Palisade people against the elves in Ensue. And you begin to see that most people don't really know how to think about these issues fully. And the port side has a long history of violence and violent revolutionary behaviors. Indeed, the port side began as a violent revolutionary movement. That is the entire point of the port side. And that is also largely why the atheist movement is port side, largely. You see, quite contrary to their atheism is a mere lack of belief in a God, nothing else nonsense that they spew, the people who run atheist organizations or listen to popular millionaire atheists like Matt Dillahunty or Alan Ra or Ahmed Mehta, all of whom are millionaires. You can check this yourself. You can check the Freedom from Religion Foundation website, the 501c3, and Dan Barker and his wife and Nicole Gaylor are millionaires. They became rich off of this atheist activism. And if you look at those websites, you quite obviously see them equating atheism with reason and rationality and science. So that they don't truly understand atheism as a mere lack of belief in a God. And on top of that, they add secular values, which of course come from secular humanism. And the atheist movement today actually began in the 19th century. Even the new atheist movement was nothing more than a revival of old 19th century free thought literature that came from the Rationalist Press Association. In fact, many of the things were just outright plagiarized. The great divine prophet Christopher Hitchens, most holy of the holy religion of atheism is not a religion, who wrote the divine and perfect sacred scriptures, God is not great, how religion poisons everything, was a plagiarist who copied verbatim many older works in his own book, and this can be easily seen online. Other people have exposed this. Samuel Putnam's 400 Years of Free Thought was plagiarized by the divine prophet Sam Harris, most holy, and his works, The End of Faith and Letter to Christian Nation, the idea that Christians are tribalists and religion creates tribalism goes back to Samuel Putnam, and it is not an independent observation that they both derived that independently. Harris very obviously uses other phrases that he got from Putnam, and these sorts of claims were constantly being repeated on atheist websites, and you can tell that they're copying each other, because not only is it word for word identical often, but quite often they'll make the same mistakes, and sometimes they'll accidentally quote the commentary along with the thing they're supposed to quote. It's like an atheist who was trying to convince me he did his own research, but he was obviously quoting from the atheist website Evil Bible. Evil Bible has this idiosyncratic tendency of alternating between Bible versions, the New Living Version and the New International Version, things like that. I can't remember off the top of my head which ones they used exactly. But every single time he brought up a Bible verse, it was quoted from the same translation that Evil Bible did, and it was to make the same point that Evil Bible did, And when I confronted it by him, he said, I just like using different Bible translations to get the full meaning of it. Without realizing my actual point was he's choosing exactly the same translation the Evil Bible chose every single time, even when it alternated. And he insisted he had never even heard of the website Evil Bible. One of those, gee, but it sounds interesting, thanks, trying to shame me. But the point is, he had never even heard of Evil Bible, he did his own research, but then he quoted a Bible verse along with the commentary from Evil Bible, word for word. And I called him out on that, and he stopped talking to me. The point I'm making, of course, is that the atheist movement is a port-side movement. It is not really true that atheism, as a mere lack of belief in a God, has people on all sides. Oh, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying atheists, even though I'm often accused of generalizing all atheists. But the atheist movement is very obviously about promoting secular humanism, and in the real world, 69% of atheists vote Democrat. So the idea that atheists are roughly evenly divided between Republican and Democrat, and there's more diversity in atheism than there is in religion, since religion, because of its religious text chaining you to a certain way of thought, is inherently conservative. All that's just nonsense. That's just idiocy. But you will notice that the atheist websites, the atheist organizations like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Humanist Association, American Atheists, and all the others that are in America, they're all 501c3 tax-exempt organizations who all say, tax the church! And talk about violating the Johnson Amendment. They get involved in politics. They should be taxed. They should be stripped of their tax exemption. We atheists care about the law. We care about the First Amendment. We care about the Johnson Amendment. They break the same laws themselves. They violate the Johnson Amendment because the Johnson Amendment doesn't say religious groups can't give opinions. It says anything that's 501c3 can't get involved in politics. And that includes opposing people like Donald Trump. And they do. They oppose Donald Trump. All of these organizations oppose him, and it doesn't matter that they claim that they're atheists and not religious. What matters is they're 501c3. Of course, most atheists who listen to them and take their marching orders from them don't know that they're 501c3, but that's because they are so laser-focused on their hatred of Christianity that they don't bother with it. And if you haven't noticed, the hatred of Christianity goes hand in hand with the hatred of conservatism, to the point where Christianity is understood as linked inextricably with conservatism, and liberal churches are written off as moderate Christians who believe less of the Bible. They believe less of it, and what they do believe in, they're less committed to. They're closer to the atheists, whereas fundamentalists will naturally vote solid Republican and be solid starboard side people, and it's all nonsense, of course, but that is how they view it. And it makes sense because their narrative is more or less about social engineering, just like the port side has always been involved in. Their rebellion, they don't really merely lack belief in a God. Anyone who listens to them knows they drone on and on and on about how evil God is. Of course, when you point this out, they'll tell you, oh, it's not this God that doesn't exist that I hate or fear. It's the believers. Of course, if you point out they just said God doesn't exist, they'll say, atheism is defined as a lack of belief. You just don't understand. I merely lack belief. I make no claims. I have no burden of proof. And of course, they are claiming God doesn't exist. They're lying to you. And obviously they're lying about it being about the believers because they're not really afraid of Christians. But they do associate Christianity with conservatism, only bringing up liberal churches if they try and diffuse a situation because they're very dishonest that way. And if you look at their websites, they all promote left-wing causes. And even the ones that try and say that they're not socialist, they're not communist, they're not left-wing, they really are if you look at the positions they hold. And this isn't shocking, because they are promoting secular humanism, because even the ones that say they're not humanists because they value animal life equal to human life are ultimately secular humanists because they have exactly the same beliefs as secular humanism. And really, in the end, when you think about it, they're generally going to promote socialist values. Think about how they talk about deconstructing your faith. Well, deconstruction was created by a communist specifically to spread communism by delegitimizing capitalism, delegitimizing Western culture and civilization, delegitimizing conservative values, and delegitimizing Christianity or other traditional religions. You can look it up. Gerarda created deconstruction specifically for this reason. It's a Marxist concept. So a bunch of people who are claiming they're not Marxist and how it's wrong for religious people to equate atheism to Marxism are, in turn, promoting Marxist ideology by promoting deconstruction and other things. And for those who would like to say socialism and communism aren't the same thing, and I'm confused, communism is a form of socialism. It doesn't matter that you say otherwise. What matters is, if you go to China, they talk about socialism. If you look at old Soviet materials, they talk about socialism. The Soviet Union's official name was the USSR. That stood for Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, not Union of Soviet Communist Republics. They were socialists. Just like Mehmet is a socialist, just like Matt Dillahunty is largely socialistic in his thinking, just like most of the modern atheist world tends to promote socialist views. And they're connected to this because there's this inherent narrative that underlies the port side view of things, just as there is for the starboard side. I'm not claiming there's not. And theirs is largely built on revolution and overthrowing the old order. And the problem with such narratives is that it's never contented to stay at a historical evil. It must always find an evil to overthrow, because the people on the port side understand themselves as rebels, and they're the heroic revolutionaries overthrowing tyranny. So therefore they must always look for tyranny to overthrow, because it gives them the nature of their existence. And this is why they think violence is justifiable, because they see the people they are fighting as oppressors and tyrants. However, the people on the starboard side tend to be less violent, precisely because in America was created by a revolution, and they see the revolutionaries as heroes who overthrow the tyranny of King George III. But they still see it as a specific situation, and they view America's founders as giving us this perfect system of government, basically from on high, effectively divinely inspired by God, effectively, and that the American system is perfect if we just obey the founding fathers, or at least near so. And the revolution was only needed in the past because of a specific situation, whereas the port side constantly needs a tyrant because they define themselves as revolutionaries. The starboard side only thinks of revolution as something needed when tyranny comes up. They don't look for tyranny, though, because they lionize the past to an extent. So, these basic views, combined with the current situation, where the port side sees itself as revolutionaries fighting the tyranny of Trump, and the starboard side sees themselves as defending Trump from the tyrants. So there's two groups of revolutionaries fighting each other in the name of liberty to overthrow tyranny. That is the comedic aspect of this, because both of them have cast themselves the roles of revolutionaries fighting for freedom against tyranny. And the only difference will be on a perspective. The people on the port side believe themselves to be the revolutionaries, and the people on the starboard side to be the tyrants, whilst the starboard people are the ones who view the port side as the tyrants and themselves as the revolutionaries. The only difference is the people on the starboard side don't want a perpetual, never-ending revolution, and certainly don't hate all forms of authority or governance. They are far less inclined to authoritarianism than they are said to be, because they are still Americans and they still have this idea of limited government is actually a big thing with them. But they don't have a problem with God in the same way the port side does, because even though there are people on the port side that believe in God, atheism is more common on that side precisely because God is an authority above you that you must submit to, and they don't like that. Their atheism in that regard is not really about lacking belief in a God due to insufficient evidence so much as not liking God because he's an authority. Again, not everyone on the port side is necessarily an atheist, and not all atheists are necessarily like that, but it is what I have studied a good deal. And the problem I have with the situation is, should Trumpet be convicted and sent to prison and made ineligible to become president, well, he'll appeal it, and by the time that happens, he would more than likely already be president or have lost the election, depending on how it goes. But should he be convicted and sentenced to an actual prison time, these two groups that view themselves as revolutionary fighting tyranny could come to a head. I don't necessarily think it would lead to an outright civil war right away, although America could very easily go into a civil war at this point. I don't think that would be the tipping point, but I do see mass protests beginning, and it could lead to one months or a couple of years later. Because even if the original cause is forgotten, the animosity can carry itself forward, you see. We still have things going on today that began in the 1920s and 1930s, that people don't remember what the original point was that created the animosity, but they still continue it. Rather like those stories where you have feuds that have been going on for generations, but people don't remember why one family hates the other, they just remember that one family hates the other. But there's always immediate causes that keep it going as well, though it just takes far less to instigate them. And that's what we're going to see, I think, should Trumpet be convicted. We will see mass protests on the starboard side, celebrations on the port side that turn into themselves protests, because if they can take down Trumpet, they can take down others, so they will go into their default and start protesting other things they don't like, hopefully to get more people in prison. They will be drunk on their own power, and they will go into a greater rampage. It will create more property damage and violence. This will, of course, cause the starboard side to panic and retreat. And like I said, it could be quelled. More than likely it will be. It usually is. But I can see a good deal of damage being done to the society, and the government having no credibility should this happen. Indeed, even if Trumpet is acquitted, or if Trumpet is found guilty but only of a misdemeanor charge, or is found guilty of a felony but only made to pay $5,000 or something like that, you would still have a situation where people are going to be rather angry. Then again, if he's acquitted, you're going to have the same problem. The port side, always ready to protest, will begin its protest, and that will create counter-protesting. And let's face reality. It's not going to be good either way. Meanwhile, if Trumpet loses the election, there'll be more accusations of it being a fraudulent election. I'm not dealing with whether or not the past one was or not, or whether it will be in the future. If Trumpet wins, they will claim it's fraudulent. And there will be even more protests. Trumpet is a very divisive figure, but at the same time, the divisiveness is not really caused by Trumpet all on his own. There's been this simmering undercurrent that goes back to those root narratives I told you about. And I know I've done a bad job explaining it, but I am hoping to explain it better on the shoot a bit. I am hoping to finally have time. I've been doing house repairs. I've been preparing for surgery, which I will need to save my life. I've been doing all sorts of things. I haven't been able to sit down and make these videos. But I'm hoping in a few days to launch on the shoot a bit a better discussion of this topic, but I don't have to censor myself so much. And I might go to that other site, Ramble, eventually. But for now, I'm just offering this as a reflection. And I don't have much else to say, so thank you, God bless, and goodbye.